Final preparations are here for the Dolphins and Commanders in Madrid in Week 11. We get a lot of ground to cover here on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I am your host, Kyle Krabs, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, NFL staff writer for A to Z Sports. Want to thank all of you for making the Locked On Sports Network the number one sports podcast network. It is your teams every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account. Use code Locked On NFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Today on the show, we have the final injury report released. We heard, courtesy of the South Florida media who made the trek to Spain. We'll give them their flowers. And I want to acknowledge one individual in particular who put together a story that I really enjoyed and pull one small quote from Champ Kelly out of that story. I want to be respectful to David Furones because obviously he's the one that flew to Spain. He's the one who had the opportunity to talk to Champ. I don't want to just read the whole story. It's a very good story for the Sun Sentinel. I recommend you read it. But I do have a quote in there that I want to touch on. And then the Dolphins do have a record-setting opportunity in Week 11 to put the Commanders in the record books for all the wrong reasons. We're going to get into all that here today on the show. So let's start with the injury report, where it would not be the Dolphins without a late Friday addition to a major player who's now questionable for the contest on Sunday morning here on the East Coast. Bradley Chubb put on the injury report with a foot injury that happened at practice on Friday. He is listed as questionable. I do not believe this is anything seriously significant, but you never know how the Dolphins are going to choose to handle these kinds of injuries with a bye week the following week. They're typically kind of conservative with a lot of this kind of stuff, with what guys do and don't play through. So that's the bad news. Bradley Chubb listed as questionable. That is not, however, the worst injury designation on the report. There is nobody ruled out. So that's kind of cool. But Austin Jackson is doubtful. And this shouldn't be a surprise. The Dolphins had the bye week after activating somebody's 21-day return to window from injured reserve for half of the season. And he was going to practice 3 days and play in the game. That ain't how this team operates. You know that by now. So Austin Jackson doubtful. I would expect he will return to the lineup barring any setbacks. Knock on wood. Against the Saints, where he'll have all of next week off or to get training and continue to build himself up. And then the following week's worth of practice before playing the game against the Saints. So expect Austin Jackson return at home at Hard Rock Stadium after the bye. More likely than not going to happen as a doubtful designation for the Dolphins in Week 11. Rasul Douglas also listed as questionable with a foot/ankle, as is D. Eskridge. That is it for the injury designation. So Austin Jackson, we've been living this life without you for 8 weeks now. Okay, same song and dance. What's another day? What's another game? I'm actually more comfortable with Larry Borum in place of Austin Jackson than I am with Cole Strange in place of James Daniels at right guard. Bradley Chubb, questionable. Chop Robinson is off the injury report altogether, officially out of concussion protocol. So Chop back in. Does that mean it comes at the expense from the football gods of Bradley Chubb? I don't know. Hopefully not. Rasul Douglas, if he does not go, pretty safe assumption Juju Brents would be in his place. Now, if Rasul is available, what does your secondary look like? That is a great question. Can't wait to find out, and hopefully find out on Sunday with Rasul being able to dress and play in this game as a questionable designation. The Commanders on the other side of the fence, a lot of names out, meaningful names out as well. Jaden Daniels, Terry McLaurin, Will Harris, who David Harrison yesterday talked about as a potential like big time addition back in the secondary for Washington, he's out. Drake Jackson out. Treylon Burks out. Questionable includes Ben Sinnott, a young tight end out of Kansas State who I really liked in the draft. I think he's going to be a good two-way player as a blocker and a receiver when his time comes. And Jordan McGee is also questionable for Washington. So Washington certainly doing the heavy lifting. 6 players ruled out already. Dolphins have no players ruled out. Austin Jackson, who is technically not even on the 53 yet, he's just activated to return from IR, will not go in more likely than not scenarios. So you look at the trajectory of the teams, you look at the injury reports, and I know Miami's got the right side of the offensive line missing. And I know they got Tyreek Hill down. But this is a game you come into, and from an alignment of availability and health perspective, Miami's got an upper hand to go with whatever upper hand you believe they may or may not have as the 3-team win that's coming in with some momentum. Right? And we'll talk about more about Washington and their, I'm going to use air quotes here, momentum thus far in the last month of the season relative to Miami, who's played their 2 best performance of the season have come in the last 3 weeks. Okay. And I don't necessarily believe this is that somebody on Twitter who listened to the crossover referred to it as and said it was very complimentary, the comment, but he was like, referred to it as like the Dolphins and the dead cat bounce, right? It's like, oh, the season's over. They had a big bounce back win against the Bills. I don't know that this roster has flatlined. Now, I don't think the aspirations that fans want are going to be achieved. I don't think they're going to the playoffs. I don't think they're going to win 10 games this year. I don't think they're winning a playoff game. And those were the things that before the season we said, man, if we're going to be content through a transition year, these are the things we really want to see because they're the things the Dolphins haven't done enough of, right? But you look at the schedule, and the schedule is the schedule. The Dolphins feel like a team that is reaching the ability to sustain their higher end of the spectrum performances because of young players and new players and learning to play together and the time on task, and it's all come together. And now they're starting to get a little healthier. So I don't think the Bills game was this one game aberration of, oh, what a fun footnote in a eulogy of a season. I don't think that's the case. And I carry those expectations into this matchup. Now, if the Dolphins, they get me again, then you guys can point and laugh. And like, was it Nelson from Simpsons? Right? You can laugh. And we'll throw the pity party for an hour during the squad show. And then we'll spend the bye week talking about GM candidates with a bad attitude instead of talking about GM candidates with a good attitude. That's just where we're at. So that's that element of it. But speaking of GM candidates, the local conglomerate that made the trip, I believe Hal Habib made the trip. I believe Omar Kelly made the trip. I know David Furones made the trip. I'm not sure who else from the local media is there, but those were the voices that I heard and recognized on the press availabilities throughout the course of the week. So shout out to you guys. Oh, I know Marcel Louis-Jacques made the trip from ESPN. I know Cam Wolf made the trip because I saw Cam Wolf and my guy Teron Armstead palling it up over there in Madrid on my TV this morning. So I know those guys all made the trip. And shout out to you guys. It's an awesome opportunity. Hope you guys are having a blast. Please stay safe and enjoy the game on Sunday, right? But David wrote a story, David Furones of the Sun Sentinel. And it was about Champ Kelly, who took a few minutes, apparently, and spoke privately with some of the South Florida media that did make the trip. And there's been a couple of stories that came out. David had a really good piece about Champ Kelly and who he is individually. But there's a quote in here about like the Waddle stuff that I want to touch on. I liked it a lot. We're going to touch on that next year on Locked On Dolphins. Make sure you guys stick with us. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. You and I make decisions every single day, but on Prize Picks, being right can get you paid. You don't miss the excitement of this football season, whether you're following the NFL, NBA, or both. There's no better time to jump in on the action than right now if you have not tried it. Prize Picks is the simplest way to play. Pick more or less on at least two player stats, and if you get them right, you win. It takes less than 60 seconds to make your lineup, and you can play anywhere Prize Picks operates, including California, Texas, and Georgia. I love their stacks feature that's new. It's a game changer. You can now pick more on a single player like Steph Curry for points, threes, and assists in the same lineup. Plus, if one of your players leaves the game early with an injury, the injury reboot saves your lineup from a loss. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL. Get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. It's good to be right. So Champ Kelly, the team's interim general manager, we have run out, by and large, of external evaluation opportunities for Champ Kelly. It really was whatever time he was instilled until the end of the trade deadline were the areas in which you were going to get any level of gauge of how Champ Kelly executes and operates business as a general manager in the NFL. And there's been more than one person on the beat who has kind of alluded to it, not hard to envision the world and the scenario in which if the Dolphins keep winning and Mike McDaniel is retained, that Champ Kelly is retained as the team's full-time general manager and they take the interim tag off of Champ Kelly. And I don't think it's the worst thing in the world because I've met Champ Kelly several times. I met Champ Kelly at the Senior Bowl and chopped up football with him for a while. He was very gracious with his time. He's an incredibly intelligent guy. He's got an awesome story. And I can't sit here and tell you guys, oh, well, he's part of what's the political term, the swamp, right? Like he's not part of the swamp in Miami where he was a part of the pre-existing establishment. He came here in March of this year, right? And he's experienced in transitions in power. I want the Dolphins to do their due diligence on all of the candidates, and I've got about 30 candidates. I don't expect them to interview 30 people, but my short list is about 10 people long. I think Champ Kelly deserves to have the interview along with everybody else, especially because he's in this position. He's been here a little bit longer. He's got an understanding of what the flaws may be as somebody who was with several other systems like the Raiders and like the Bears beforehand, before coming to Miami. And seeing how this team has operated from a front office perspective for the last 8 months before being put in charge in an interim basis. I don't think you can look at Champ Kelly's track record and from who did his teams draft when he was the assistant general manager. I don't think that's a fair depiction. And that's what makes it hard when we collectively as the outside are talking about general manager candidates, right? Because we only see what the front end product is. We don't see what the process behind the scenes is. We don't know what contributions to the scouting process Champ Kelly did or did not make in Chicago or in Las Vegas. We know he was a part of a transition of power from Dave Ziegler to Tom Telesco, and he bridged the gap between the two. Those are the things we know. We know Champ Kelly took over at the trade deadline and traded Jalen Phillips and bought up the compensation to get a top 100 pick. Those are the things we know. We do know the team took calls on Jalen Waddle. And of all the quotes in this story from David Furones in the Sun Sentinel, I think it's very worth your time. I'm not going to read them all. I'm going to read one. Does a divisional rival knocking on the door alter your price tag for a player? It can play into the equation in certain instances, Kelly said. I'm not a fan of watching a player that we've drafted and grown compete against us in a division. That's a personal thing with me. But that doesn't mean we wouldn't make a trade in the division. We have to look at every scenario. I dig it. That whole we've drafted and grown to go play for somebody else twice a year, personal thing with me. You never avoid the phone when it rings. But that was my outlook on any player, unless it's a player that I'm down on, right? Like Devontae Parker getting traded with a 5 to the Patriots for a 3. What a gift from the football gods that trade was. I'd say, yeah, I'd do that business in a heartbeat because I was ready to move on from Devontae Parker. And the Patriots were so ready for a wide receiver that Bill Simmons had to run to his phone and tweet out, sure, you're not going to be used to a quarterback who could throw the ball, so we'll take it slow. I don't know why he turned into Hank Hill there at the end because he's from Boston. He's not the propane salesman from Texas. But Bill Simmons, if you ever move to Texas, there's your bit. And then proceeded to catch passes for Mac Jones and I think caught 30 balls Devontae Parker did. So I really liked hearing that element of the puzzle because trading Waddle is, I think, a disastrous decision in my mind in the first place. But then to put the layer of it going to a team like Buffalo, whose receivers cannot separate, we found that firsthand out on Sunday, right? And to give a player like Waddle, who answers all of their biggest problems offensively on a long-term contract with a price-friendly figure because it was spread out across more years on the deal in the prime of his career for a deferred price because they think they can just put you through the ringer because you're selling at the trade deadline. That would have been the definition of bad business in my mind. So Champ Kelly, not a fan of the idea of growing and investing players in-house. He does talk about building through the draft, courtesy of the constraints of the salary cap, all that kind of stuff. And it's a lot of the stuff you would expect a general manager candidate to say in any interview, right? And he obviously wasn't interviewing for the job at that moment. He was talking to the media. But knowing Champ Kelly's background, right? He's got his master's degree in business administration. So there's a administrative leadership hierarchy ability here that exists beyond, well, I was a regional scout for 8 years, and then I was an area scout, then I was a regional scout, then I was a national scout, then I was a assistant director of this, and then a director of that, and then I got a promotion to the director of this, and then I became a GM. Right? That learns the scouting process, but the general manager, it's about the general management of the team. So having a business administration degree, and Champ Kelly also being a guy who was a player/coach at an indoor league, who also happened to be the general manager of the indoor league. So he had to run all of the business management, all of the player personnel management, all of the coaching staff management. That's really unique experience that then gets parlayed into, he also worked at IBM at that period of time as a software engineer. Then he gets into scouting, and he gets a shot with Mike Shanahan and the Denver Broncos. Pretty quickly works his way out of just like the bottom levels of that into some leadership roles in Denver and then Chicago and then Las Vegas and now Miami. This is a legitimate candidate for this position. This is not he was here and somebody's got to catch passes. So Devontae Parker and Mike Gesicki might as well combine for 2,000 yards. Like, it's not that kind of season. This is not that kind of candidate, right? I think that's the perfect analogy. You can have a bad wide receiver room and somebody's going to put up 800 yards because in today's NFL, somebody has to put up 800 yards. That's just the math of how the game is played. That doesn't mean he's a promising young player that's going to end up being a 1,500-yard receiver in a few years. Maybe he's just a player in the perfect situation with a limited ceiling, right? Maybe it's a Brian Hartline, and this is no shade to Brian Hartline. I love Brian Hartline. He's one of my favorite Dolphins players when I was a teenager, right? But Hartline catching those 1,000-yard passes, or those 1,000-yard seasons, was because somebody had to catch 1,000 yards and somebody had to catch the football. Him being a 1,000-yard receiver versus Tyreek Hill being a 1,000-yard receiver is two totally different things. I'm not calling Champ Kelly the Tyreek Hill of general manager candidates either. We're just going analogy crazy here on a Friday. This is a legitimate candidate for this position. And I would hope that he is viewed as such by fans, despite the fact that he got here in March. Because again, he is not a part of the establishment that has gotten us to this point. He's hopefully somebody that can churn the bottom of the roster and facilitate some healthy bottom of the roster changes in the meantime. But that's the only measures we're going to have on the outside looking in. Record-setting opportunity for the Dolphins. We're going to touch on that quickly on the other side of the break. Make sure you guys stick with us. NFL season is back, and honestly, there's nothing better than being in the stadium surrounded by fans cheering on your team. But let's be honest, getting tickets can be a hassle between queues, login screens, and prices jumping at checkout. It can be very frustrating. Now, probably at this stage, not going to get a ticket for Sunday's game against the Commanders. Let's be honest. But the Dolphins are back after the bye against the Saints at home. You can use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. Game Time is fast, easy, and backed by the Game Time guarantee. You always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. Plus, all fees are included, so the price you see is the price you pay. You can pull up Game Time on your phone, and in just a few taps, get amazing deals. Talking about going to your favorite NFL games for as low as $100. They have zone deals as well. Pick the section. Game Time picks the seats, and you save big. So download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms to apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Kyle Krabs, host of Locked On Dolphins. Once again, want to thank all of you for making the Locked On Podcast Network the number one sports podcast network. Very exciting times for all of us. It is your teams every day. The Dolphins with a chance for some history, but they would be on the right side of this history. The Washington Commanders. We talked about the Dolphins and their momentum coming into this game a little bit. They have lost 5 consecutive games. And it's not just that they've lost 5 consecutive games to go from 3-2 to 3-7. The irony here is it was a 1-point loss at the last final gun to Chicago that kind of broke the season for Washington, when last year it was Chicago started similarly, and it was a Hail Mary loss to Washington that got Chicago's season off the rails. They've lost the last 4 games by more than 20 points. They are 1 game away from tying the NFL record for the most consecutive 20-point losses in NFL history. Behind, currently, the 1986 Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who went 2-14. That is the company the last month that Washington has kept. 44-22, 28-7, 38-14, 44-22. They've played some good teams in here. They played the Seahawks and the Lions the last 2 weeks. Those are good football teams. And they promptly got 289 average yards of offense. Seattle got 418 yards of offense. Detroit got 546 yards offense, ran for 226 yards. Seattle's the only team that has not rushed for at least 100 or 148 yards against Washington since September 28th. Last month and a half, there's been one team that hasn't gone for at least $150 on the ground against Washington. Seattle at 88. And they got 330 yards in the air and won by 26 points. I'm not saying the Dolphins are coming into this game saying, let's win this game by 20 points. But it underscores what Washington's season is right now. I mean, you got some of it from David Harrison, right? And that's why, like, the term about the dead cat bounce, and I'm not sure I'm there with where this Dolphins season is at, because 2 of the last 3 weeks have been the Dolphins' best performances of the year. And I think the context behind why this season started the way that it did, where you're giving away games late in games, why you're so porous in the first 4 weeks of the season against the run, and what it's looked like since, I subscribe to all of that. Now, I don't think the roster is talented enough to get to where it needs to go. I think there are holes that severely need to be addressed long term. I think the turnovers is the most infuriating piece of this entire puzzle for Miami, because this was the side of the ball that had the money invested in it, was the offensive side of the ball. Well, we got continuity, fourth year in the scheme. We're mastering our fit in the offense. You've got games this season with 4 turnovers. You're first in the NFL in giveaways with 7 or 30th in the NFL. So third highest in giveaways with 17. 31st in interceptions with 13. Can't have it. Right, you're 20th in net yards per attempt. And I know Tyreek Hill's out. I'd have moved on from Tyreek Hill in March. So I don't really care that Tyreek Hill's out. I still don't think that it absolves you from these shortcomings that you have offensively. That's the infuriating part for me. I can certainly contextualize the defensive side of the ball and why it's been the way it's been. But you've seen significant signs of life for Miami versus a Washington team that is flatlining. 4 consecutive 20-point losses. The 19 Dolphins didn't even do that. Think about that. I'm going back to look it up right now because now I'm curious. The 2019 Dolphins lost by 49, 43, 25, 20, and then 1. So they are technically a part of the 20-plus point losses, but Washington's lost all 4 of these games by 22 or more. No, 21 or more. It was 28-7, and then 2 44-22s, and then lost by 26 to Seattle. This is a worse stretch than the first 4 weeks of the 19 Dolphins. Maybe not from a raw numbers perspective, but from a not from an aggregate total score. And then they lost the next games by 1 because they went for 2 in the win after the bye against Washington, of all teams. Lost by 10 to Buffalo. Lost by Pittsburgh by 13. And then you beat the Jets and the Colts in back-to-back weeks. You get to 2-7. And then you're 2-9. And then you beat the Eagles in the Buccaneer shot game, I think is what that play was called, that field goal play, Sanders touchdown. Did he pass? I think he passed for the touchdown, right? Yeah, Jason Sanders 1-yard pass to Matt Hawk. If you haven't seen the highlights of Eagles Dolphins 2019, if you're a new fan, bless you for not having to live through that season. But go watch the highlights of that game. You were talking about Devontae Parker. That game alone got Devontae Parker's value up high enough to get a contract extension, then get traded eventually to New England. What did Devontae finish that game with now that I'm down the rabbit hole? And he put some of those guys in Philly on posters. Yeah, 7 for 159 and 2 scores in that game. Allen Hurns goes 5 for 79 and a tud. That's how you know where the Dolphins were at offensively. Fitzpatrick threw for 365 and 3 touchdowns. Outstanding. I digress. Washington, 4 consecutive 21-plus point losses. 1 loss away, a feat that not even the 2019 Dolphins achieved. 1 loss away of 20-plus points from the NFL record. That is where Washington is at as a football team right now. Without their starting quarterback, Deron Payne is suspended. Terry McLaurin is out. Their 2 best edge rushers are out. Their best cornerback is out. Austin Eckler's out for the season. I don't think that that's necessarily a loss relative to some of the young guys they have in the running back room, but come on now. It's all on the table for us here. And I'm not coming into this game saying, well, I think the Dolphins should win by 21 points. I'll take a win by 1. I don't care. I'd like to win the football game. But 2 teams heading in opposite directions should give you that much more magnitude of, if you don't show up and play the game after the game that you played against Buffalo, those talking points are going to be uncomfortable because now you're getting into, this was a team that was lifeless against you off the highest of highs. And I think if you come in and you lose this game, it's because you probably beat yourself and you don't have the right focus throughout the week. And this team is not immune from that, because they've talked multiple times at the podium before and after games about how their preparation wasn't channeled in the right way. And, that's an indictment of the leadership of the team and the coaching staff to get everybody focused properly to prepare for the game. The ball is in their court once again. Can you sustain it? Let's find out, because I have high expectations because of exactly what Washington is, which is on the doorstep of history in a futile way that not even the worst version of the Dolphins team in franchise history ever achieved. That's going to do it for us here today on the show. Kyle Krabs, keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys as always for checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day today. Enjoy the game on Sunday. I'll be back with Jeff Scanina and Grease for the post-game squad show for an hour live after the game on YouTube. Then you can then find it wherever you list your favorite podcasts. And then I will have my own post-game show after that. Here's to it being a Victory Monday pod going into the bye week. Kyle Krabs, I'm out of here. Go Fins.